The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening and welcome to the November 2012 Polyphonic On-Campus webinar. This is Steve Danu from polyphonic.org, and we're very glad that you're joining us tonight with others from around the country for what will be our third in a series of 3 webinars this fall. Tonight we're very excited to have with us a whole panel of wonderful musicians to discuss the intriguing title you see on your screen, Music is Dying, or Is It? Our next webinar after this one will be happening in the spring. Our spring series will be February, March, and April. We do typically 1 webinar a month, 3 in the spring, 3 in the fall. And we will certainly let you know when registration is available for those events. We also have all of our previous webinars recorded and available for your on-demand viewing on our website, which is polyphonic.org. And the on-campus portion is just polyphonic.org/oncampus. We would really like to hear your feedback on webinars, and certainly would love to hear ideas you may have for topics. If you have topics you'd like to hear about or presenters you'd like to suggest, please do email us at info@polyphonic.org, or you can just go to polyphonic.org and submit a message there. Just a couple of logistics before we begin tonight's presentation. You'll notice that your phone or computer audio is muted by default, just on background noise. But we absolutely encourage you to ask questions, and we're going to have plenty of time at the end of tonight's presentation to have a discussion and conversation with all of our presenters. So again, we really encourage you to ask questions, and there's 2 ways to do that. The first, if you'd prefer to actually have your line muted and ask your question verbally, there's a yellow hand button on your webinar control panel. Just press that button and it'll let us know if you want to be unmuted. If you prefer, you can just write a question in. There's a question box on your webinar control panel. Just type a question in there and hit send. We'll get it and we can read it for you and have the presenters, talk about and answer your question for you. So without any further ado, I want to welcome all of our speakers tonight and turn it over to Chris Thibdeau, who is going to moderate and introduce the speakers.
Hi, thank you, Steve. My name is Chris Thibdeau, and welcome to Classical Music is Dying, or Is It? So, really quick aside, I know Steve from high school. We went to high school together, and Steve and I were batting around some ideas about a intriguing and fun webinar idea. So I kind of said something mildly snarky like, oh, we should just do a webinar called Classical Music is Dead. And that evolved to this, which is much more constructive. I'm currently in Atlanta, Georgia, working with the Georgia Youth Symphony Orchestra. I'm the conductor of one of 4 youth orchestra ensembles that we have. And to just give you a brief overview of what we're thinking about, so a lot of people will talk and say, well, classical music is dead or it has become irrelevant, any other permutation of that statement. And one of the arguments against that is, well, people have always been saying this about classical music. So I pulled up some quotes from ICSOM, which you should be able to see on your screen, where they wrote a very great article last month in October of this year, where they cited a couple of articles from the 70s where, clearly they're showing that this mentality has been around. You can read them on your screen. Orchestras have one alternative to go out of business. They must reshape either by reducing the size of the orchestra from 100 to 90, etc. Times magazine article saying that we're going to lose a third or half of our symphony orchestras. So while that argument does stand, that classical music has always gone through fluctuation. It's always seen that kind of argument. If you just look at the newspapers, it's rather demoralizing. These are just a handful of the orchestras that are in the news either because they folded or they have financial difficulty or lockout, etc. Yeah, so the list goes on, and yeah, kind of preaching to the choir here, I'm sure. So the question is, you know, so now what? Either classical music is dying or it isn't. Either way, I think it's fair to say that something needs to be done, something needs to change, because I'm sure that we all wouldn't be here. We all wouldn't be here unless we felt very passionately about what we do and we believe in the value of classical music. And yes, excellent comment from Simon Jacobs that we are facing competition from new technologies. Exactly. Like if you look in the like in the 1950s, almost every American household had a piano in it, and now everyone has YouTube. And that we could have a whole webinar on the evolution of music education in the public school system. So that is very valuable and an excellent point. The panel that we've brought here to speak with us now today, I thought the best way to begin solving a problem, or at least begin the conversation, is to speak to people who are doing new and exciting things and are doing them successfully. So today we have with us Carlos Javier, who is a performer and marketing manager with Classical Revolution Cleveland, and is also the director of music with an organization called the Muscle House. Charles Peltz, who is the music director of the Glens Fall Symphony Orchestra, and Dante Romo, who is the co-founder, executive director, and teaching artist of the Atlanta Music Project. So I'm going to have each panelist have about 5 minutes to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what they're doing in their organizations. So let's begin with Carlos.
Hi, what's up, guys? Just to let you know, if you guys want to interrupt me if there's a question, because I don't think I see any questions right now. I don't have that screen, but if there's any questions that come up during the time that I speak, just go ahead and stop me and ask. I'm totally open to that. So thank you, guys. You guys there? It was really difficult to put this together because of the strength of the topic's title. I feel like all musicians, especially those of us speaking here today, like Chris said, we live and think of this reality every day about what could possibly be the decline of classical music. And obviously, we're all here, and we chose a different direction in all of our careers, and we decided to face these problems head on. And I'm not sure if you guys feel the same way I do, but I feel like I'm oftentimes a bearer of bad news to my friends or my colleagues, people who are still aspiring to be performers in classical music, just by being knowledgeable of what's going on in today's orchestral market. So I think that there's a lot of subjectivity when we consider the word like dying, and especially classical music dying, or if there's like a death in classical music. Like if you look at places like Florida, they've had massive reductions in their own local professional full-time orchestras, but orchestras like the New World Symphony and the Cleveland orchestras were able to succeed and increase their endowments in the state of Florida. So it's kind of hard to think of if this recent development in those two orchestras against the older establishments, if that's a net positive for classical music. And so is it okay if one aspect fails in an area of classical music and one succeeds? Is that an overall success? So I put together two very general, possibly very disagreeable definitions of what could be a death in classical music or classical music dying. So here it is. Musicians not readily gaining jobs performing classical music to an audience or using their training to support themselves financially. This is orchestra jobs, positions in chamber music groups, teaching in schools that, where their training is really at use. And the second one is the number of people listening to classical music decreases. Audience for live classical music decreases, and a decrease in overall audience attendance for symphonies. This is really important. I think it's really important to differentiate live classical music as opposed to recorded classical music, because we are listening to music differently in today's age. It's a lot through computer speakers and through Spotify and through YouTube viewings. It's really hard to say what is what is creating a positive output for classical music. So I put to consider record sales for classical music recordings and views and page views of classical music media on the internet. So this is really hard to define or even grasp onto because a lot of it isn't tangible. It's not something that you could really hold on or print on a piece of paper, how many views and what is the overall success of our field. So I mentioned, my next slide is actually by Eric Nielsen. He's a lawyer in Minnesota. He released this article October 17th, 2012 for the NPR News. And we all know the Minnesota Orchestra's current situation. It's really hard to see such a high-level orchestra go through this. But his first quote that I took from the article was, "The first reality points to a second, to increase significantly society's value perception of live, world-class classical music. Greater exposure and appreciation in that order would need to occur in our schools, starting at kindergarten and continuing through college." So obviously there's a call that everyone sees, not even classical musicians, but people who are big fans of classical music, that education has to start earlier, that has to be conditioned throughout their educational life, and that it's something that happens ongoing for them. So, and then I took out a second blurb, which says, do you have that screen up for me? Sorry. The second blurb I have, first, make concerts more accessible by reducing ticket prices. Raising ticket prices works against the essential need to grow audiences. Performing in 10 venues across the Twin Cities and offering memberships, an unlimited number of concerts for just $5 a month. So this speaks to just trying to grow the audience number by making it as available as possible. I think people are willing to try new things as long as it's not a financial hardship, and it definitely goes against placing whatever dollar value you believe an orchestra may carry. It really is just trying to simply grow the audience number and membership. Here in Cleveland Orchestra, we have every student under 18 years old that actually comes in for free. So that's the way they're trying to directly affect that. And then my last quote is a little long, but we who want the Minnesota Orchestra and the SPCO to thrive need to attract more people who have not yet experienced enough exposure. We need to figure out how to compress many years' worth of exposure and this appreciation into a dozen or so concerts over a 2 to 3 year period. We have to draw more people away from a mind-boggling array of alternative attractions. We have to disabuse people of the stereotypical perception that orchestra concerts are only for snobs or nerds or old folks or some kind of elite. I think that's where I definitely relate the most. I did receive my education at the Cleveland Institute of Music, and I'm totally a normal guy. I listen to all kinds of music, and I think that music, classical music, our art form, Brahms, Beethoven, Schnittke, Bartok, we coexist. That coexists to me with Kendrick Lamar or anything that I'm listening to currently. So that was definitely a quote that I saw and I related to. So my two organizations that I work mainly with are, the first one is Classical Revolution. We really wanted to help the local musicians of Cleveland. That was sort of the first thing we wanted to do. So we increased the performances opportunities for musicians in Cleveland. We have basically 3 performances a month, one at the Happy Dog, one at a bar next to CIM, and one often in an art gallery in Cleveland. What's nice to see is that there's collaborations that happen between the students of Cleveland, the Cleveland Orchestra members, and even teachers that receive general education degrees from Cleveland schools. Another aim is to perform for people in different demographics, mainly ages 21 to 35, increase the number of classical music fans in that same age group. That is my age group, and that's what I wanted to see. I wanted to be able to relate my art form to my friends, and I think that's our biggest challenge that we face. And it's actually been really exciting to figure out how to do that. We wanted to offer performances at a high artistic level. Obviously, we believe that this art form is only best when it's performed incredibly well. It's really a way to speak and to emote to the audience without having to politely have them politely listen to us in a sense, like a kid's recital, you know. So we wanted to be on the same plane as anyone who would get on the stage and want to perform, and aim to coexist with acts that regularly appear on that stage. No lecture recitals. Musicians love to talk about their pieces. They love to talk about harmonic changes and motive structure, and oftentimes when you're having a hot dog and a beer, it's not really the most welcome thing to hear when you're doing that. Unexpected effects of classical revolution were actually really cool. All the audience members know when things suck. I use suck very lightly because there's a lot of ways things can suck. It's either boring or it's played badly, or maybe the performers aren't emoting. And they know when we play maybe something by Coldplay and then there's something played that's a Brahms sextet. They obviously know the quality and the differences between the two. So the fans appreciate classical repertoire more than other genres. I've never seen a crowd actually want more Brahms sextet. We played 2 movements and they wanted more, and I couldn't believe it. It was really cool. And the last thing is performers gain perspective and understand what is effective musically, and that's a very selfish musical thing that happens. They just communicate better. It's an amazing thing that happens. So that's Classical Revolution Cleveland. All the branches are different too in all the other cities. Some of them read, but we really try to prepare our performances as much as we can, and so there's lots of rehearsals and sort of programming that goes into what we do. The other organization that I do is called the Muscle House. We actually have a launch date in January 2013. We're associated currently with the Cleveland Metropolitan School District and several philanthropic groups in the Cleveland area. But our aim is to provide music lessons to the students of Cleveland without any expenses to the student. So about a year ago, Cleveland had actually eliminated, the Cleveland Metropolitan School District eliminated music programs across Cleveland, across their own school districts. So we wanted to bring that back. We wanted to create a mentorship program for the students who wanted to take lessons. Equal time in lessons and in volunteer work and philanthropy. So we have it's called the Muscle House 1-for-1. Basically, any time that goes into a lesson is then given to philanthropy and volunteer work. So the student pays off, basically, their lesson with volunteer work. Some of the aspects are that we connect students with motivated instructors. Instructors also function as mentors and project managers. So a lot of the time we have students that see things the way we do, and they see the value in music instruction, they see the value in volunteer work and volunteerism. And luckily we do live in a city like Cleveland where volunteer work is such a big part of our culture. And it's really nice to see that musicians really gravitate toward the program like that. We wanted to create a community of musicians and enable collaboration between musicians, organizations, and businesses. So this was, the thing that comes up to mind when I wrote this is funding and the pool of students that we're grabbing from. There is a challenge of organizations, nonprofit organizations, going for the same funds. So we decided to look for where the gaps were in our community. And we went for what we believed would not affect other organizations, other schools of music, other places where people were taking lessons from. And that was very important to us so that we can collaborate with them instead of challenge them. Maintain a music curriculum for the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Like I said, they eliminated their music programs a year ago, and so that's how we're reintroducing music into the schools. And to reach out to a different demographic to help encourage the evolution of the concert-going community. I believe the Metropolitan School District here in Cleveland, the final number is about 78% non-white. So we're trying to introduce this art form and get more of these guys playing, these families listening to repertoire, and the kids getting excited about classical music as a form of expression, and then ultimately as a form of development into themselves, into their own education. So, yeah, I mean that's basically what I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. Next, we'll turn to Charles Peltz, who is the music director of the Glens Falls Symphony Orchestra.
Thank you all for being part of this tonight, those of you who are listening in, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel with these really innovative and interesting people. The Glens Falls Symphony is a unique little local organization. We are, we believe, the smallest city in America to have a full-time professional orchestra, or not a full-time, but a fully professional orchestra. So all the members of the orchestra are members of the American Federation of Musicians, and we have a 5-concert winter series, and we have summer programs as well in a community that's really very, very small and is usually not thought of as someplace that could support professional music. We do that, we are able to sustain ourselves through a number of approaches. From a business perspective, we are able to enjoy a flexibility that full-time orchestras are not able to have. And, you know, it has been commented often, including by the gentleman who wrote the article for the Minnesota Orchestra, is that when one makes a commitment to a person as a full-time employer, both parties are now obligated in some very deep ways. And we don't have a history in the arts of engaging in the layoff structure that happens in most industries, which means that if I'm a car maker and I start to have a period in which I'm not able to sell automobiles, I go to some of my employees and I say, well, you're not going to be able to work for a while. And nobody likes it, but everyone accepts that those are the downturns and upturns of an industry. In music, we tend to think that, well, if things are going badly, we've got to either go out of business or stick it out and hope. And so when you're in a per-service organization, such as ours in Glens Falls, we are able to weather those storms a little more easily without breaking contractual agreements because we can see things coming and be more agile. I don't know if the Glens Falls Symphony is necessarily a good model in that we're doing very well. And when I say it isn't a good model, it might not be somewhere that those who are struggling can look, except I could say this, that we are unafraid of the kind of repertoire that we play. We, in fact, just yesterday did world premiere of a piece by Ezra Latterman with text by Robert Pinsky. And we did 2 performances, and both of those performances were very well attended. But what's more important for us is that we try to provide a varied menu of music for the community, including POPs programs in the summer. I don't think any of it is highly unusual, except that we have a statistic that we've garnered, and we find it to be rather interesting, and we're not sure how this has come about. But we took the percentage of a total demographic that the New York Philharmonic serves in New York, and then we took one of a regional orchestra in New York, upstate, and then we took ourselves, and it turns out that we service 3 times more people than the others, which means our community turns out in a much higher percentage for events. And what maybe causes that? Well, there's a DNA in the community of arts appreciation. But I'd like to take my comments and broaden them just a bit and ask a couple of questions of both our panelists for their responses at some point, and those of you who are listening. For probably at least 60 to 80 years, the United States has had an extraordinary system of public school music education. It is understandably envied. Orchestras, bands, and choruses have been producing, by now, probably millions of young people who have performed at least a medium level to a very high level. Those who may have grown up in states like Texas have played in ensembles that are crackers stack. I mean, just very, very high level. And we have to ask ourselves the question, if we've been doing this for 80 years and we still don't have full houses at the orchestra, where is the disconnect in that? How have we put students in a situation to practice their clarinet or their violin, learn their vocal music, such a high level for the 6 or 8 years that they're involved in school music, and when they leave, they seem to have no appreciation for the art? This, to me, is a very fundamental question, because if we aren't able to answer that question, then we've spent a great deal of energy in educating what we thought we were educating people to do, but it has had very little effect on them after they leave school, in which case we should say that that education has probably been deficient. because we hope that education is something that we impart and create so that people will have it for their lives and continue to develop it. And it's not in 1950 or 1970 that we weren't giving a music education. We were, and we were giving a high-level one, but somehow, as they say, it didn't stick. And that's a very important question for us to ask, because as we endeavor in other like activities, even if we change the paradigm, meaning if we have wonderful ill-systemic programs, which I think is a fabulous idea, of course I do, who would not? But if we're teaching more students to play instruments, we've been doing that. And yet somehow when they evolve from that as children into adults, they aren't interested in it as a consumer of music. And we have to ask ourselves the question, have we taught students to love music, or have we taught students to love the activity of music directed by an adult in front of them, in which there's a communal activity that they enjoy? And that's very different than teaching someone to love music. And I think that's if classical music is dying or is healthy in certain places, it might be that when one looks in the DNA of the community, there has been something that has caused appreciation that has been conjoined with participation. And I'll circle back to the community in which I work, Little Glens Falls, New York. In the 1950s and 60s, some of you may know this is a historical phenomenon. If anyone's older, you may have experienced this. The famous Folk Rock Agency used to have something called the Community Concert Series, in which each community had a committee of people, volunteers, who would take it upon themselves to sell subscriptions to a series of concerts presented in a local venue. And this was done through the Folk Agency, so if a community was able to sell a certain number of tickets, they could get an artist of a particular caliber. So if you were a community and you could sell out your 1,000-seat high school auditorium, you might be able to get Andre Watts or Segovia or the Indianapolis Symphony on tour, because you'd proven to Hurok that you could pay the bills. And in Little Glens Falls, they were apparently, in the 50s and 60s and 40s, extraordinarily good at developing this appreciation. And so I've often, and therefore Hurok was sending big-name artists to this little community. And so I've wondered if the importance of an appreciating music education has allowed Glens Falls to have in its DNA a more susceptibility to being attenders and consumers of music, and not just those who also participated, but thought of music as only a participatory exercise. And with that, I think I've used my allotted time, and that's some food for thought for folks.
Yeah, that's great. Really good question, Mr. Peltz. I'm taking notes and scratching my head over here too. Next we have Dante Romo, who is the co-founder and executive director and teaching artist for the Atlanta Music Project.
Thank you, Chris. Glad to be here. I appreciate the invitation to talk about a subject that is near and dear to my heart and everyone else's heart that's listening here, I'm sure. I grew up really enjoying and loving classical music, but it wasn't until I started doing it in a group that I really came to enjoy it. It wasn't that I didn't as much appreciate the music, but as soon as I was good enough to join a group, that's when I really thought, this is really powerful stuff, and I enjoyed going. So what I do today is I've created, through the Atlanta Music Project and our teaching artists, a vehicle for students to be part of this group, powerful musicians that will enable them to really feel like what they're doing is fun, social, and challenging all at the same time, but that they're going to get that feeling much earlier than I did. I got that feeling in 9th grade when I joined my first band. I want this to happen for students much, much earlier. So I'm going to just go through very quickly what the Atlanta Music Project is. And in our own little way, I think we are definitely contributing to the progress of classical music staying and becoming more important and more part of everyone's daily life. So we were founded in 2010, and essentially what the Atlanta Music Project is, it's an organization that provides intense music education for underserved youth right in their neighborhood. The teachers consist of about 20 highly trained, outstanding performing classical musicians. We teach 160 students every day of the week. We have 3 sites. And in the end, this entire organization puts on dozens of concerts each year, combining our students, our teachers. We do these concerts all over Atlanta. So if I can just go to the next slide, there's a few key things that the Atlanta Music Project does that contributes to contributes to keeping classical music alive in Atlanta. You'll see my first point here has amp and arrows pointing to community. One of the things that we do is that instead of having a program that is based in one part of the city, we bring classical music right to communities that wouldn't have it. And I should say that the Atlanta Public Schools and other school districts in Atlanta do have some music in the schools, but without private lessons, the amount of time on the instrument that the schools offer are not going to be enough for a student to develop a lot of musical facility, and they definitely won't be out performing concerts on a regular basis. But I just want to mention that Atlanta Public Schools and a lot of other school districts in Atlanta do have music, some music. And when I say community, we're looking at underserved communities, meaning one of the first things that we look at when we're considering going into a community with our programs is, are there youth orchestras, are there youth choirs in this community? And generally, that ends up being communities that have a lot of minorities and that have a lot of low-income families. Another thing that the Atlanta Music Project does to help bring music to the community is that we offer our services at a time when the communities we serve can most use them. We try to avoid anything that doesn't actually benefit the community that we're serving. The best time for us to offer our services is after school. Our kids have school, generally if they're in elementary school, they're off at 2:30, and that means they might not see their parents or another caretaker until 5:30, 6:30. And that's 20 hours a week of free time that can be used in a very, very, very positive way. So we offer our programs in underserved communities during after-school hours. And the last thing we do is we try to lower barriers, access barriers to high-quality education, music education. So we're in the neighborhood. The kids don't have to drive long distances. They can walk, or they can take a bus, a school bus, to our sites. And we provide the instrument and the teachers for them at little to no cost. And the reason I put lowering barriers as an investment, I think that that's one of the things that we have to do if we're going to rebuild a new generation of classical music lovers. We fundraise to offer a program that's almost free, but really it's an investment in classical music, in our own careers as musicians, and it's a good investment in the community as a whole. So I'm going to skip to the next slide now. I think that one of the most important things about creating a generation of musicians that have music lovers, people that are very, very passionate about what they're doing, I think it's important to look at the quality and the intensity of the experience they're having growing up. Mr. Peltz spoke about what is it that that we can do to make sure that the kids that go through a music education program growing up continue to be longtime concert goers and patrons and advocates for the art. Well, I think it has to do a lot with that experience that I spoke about when I first started speaking. Immersion versus exposure. Is it enough to go out to a school with a group of musicians and demonstrate a woodwind quintet or a Mozart piece to the students and talk a little bit about my career as a musician? Is that enough to ignite a passion from classical music or for anything in a young child? Maybe, but I don't like those chances. I don't like those odds. So we focus with the Atlanta Music Project on full immersion and intensity. Our kids are with us 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, and it's the real deal. The repertoire that we're teaching is classical music, meaty. Of course, we'll do spirituals, we'll do Latino music, we'll do Irish folk music, but it's the real deal. It's pedagogically sound, and it's real intensive classical music. And one of the key things is that we don't tend to teach execution apart from passion. No matter what level our students are at, we always, always, always make sure to teach them passion. We ask them, are you enjoying your playing? Are you enjoying your sound? Are you commanding the do you have a commanding presence when you play? Would your audience enjoy this? This is as important to us as playing in tune and rhythmically sound. So again, creating a love of music through expecting passion as well as execution, I think is really important to creating a fire that burns deep inside these kids that will last their entire life. And then I'll go to my next slide. And I think a key part of the Atlanta Music Project, probably the most important part of our organization, is who are we engaging to pass on this education, knowledge, love of classical music. Well, everyone that is involved in our organization is a musician, a performing musician. They teach the students. They go into these neighborhoods, which can be quite dangerous and quite rough. They're there every day on a consistent basis. Our teachers are not just teachers, but they're also mentors. They know our kids' lives. They know our kids' parents, and they see each other every day. Our teaching artists perform. They perform in the community. They do free concerts. They also perform in established venues. They perform with our kids, without our kids. So as you can see, what we do is we're slowly taking classical music, taking our musicians, and making them part of the everyday community that we're in. So instead of being only in one part of town, we're actually ingrained in this community. And people know in the neighborhoods that we serve, the Atlanta Music Project will be there every day, teaching these kids, rain, snow, whatever may be, we will always be there. And that's really important as people begin to equate classical music with these great teachers, with these great people, with their kids performing it. It becomes part of the culture of the community. And our classical musicians are also 21st century musicians. They do all the fundraising. We do all the administrating. And we do all the advocating. We have several teaching artists that can speak at conferences, that can do these lecture recitals or lecture demonstrations when they talk about music for social change, and then turn around and conduct our students in a short performance, or turn around and play a great solo piece. So these are just three of the ways that we are using the Atlanta Music Project to make sure that classical music is growing. Again, this is from a rejuvenation perspective. We don't have the ability to change marketing to attract more audiences to our concerts. We're focused on the other end, which is the education and the youth end. We do everything. We approach everything as an investment through youth, and hopefully our colleagues in the orchestral world will do their thing to improve classical music's status, and together we'll end up helping to keep this great music alive. So once again, we work on community. We make sure that our programs are the real deal with a lot of education and solid classical music behind it. And we really utilize high-quality classical musicians and make sure that they're at the heart of the community and at the heart of the organization.
Awesome. Thank you, Dante. So right now, we're going to utilize the rest of this time as a pretty casual question and answer. There are already some questions that have come in from the audience. What I'd like to do is to take no more than 5 minutes, because it's a great question that Mr. Peltz brought up, and just get the panelists' perspective, and if anyone else wants to type in and comment too. I think this is a very powerful question, and it is very important. Where is the disconnect coming from? Are we teaching a love for music, or are we just teaching a love for playing in band or playing in orchestra? Does anyone have any comments or perspective on that?
I'll go ahead and take a quick stab at it. This is Dante with the Atlanta Music Project. Obviously, there's many answers to the question. I think this is just one of them. But if we compare the pastimes that this nation loves, namely football, I believe that everyone can identify with the NFL, with football, and I think it's because growing up, while kids may not all want to be in the NFL, everyone has tossed a football, everyone has cheerleaded at a game, everyone has attended a high school game, a college game, everyone has played football in the schoolyard, and no matter how good you are growing up, there's always going to be a football team for you. Competitive, house league, school league, backyard league, friends. Now, if we flip to the other side and think about youth orchestras, now I'm speaking about youth orchestras, not bands and not jazz orchestras, but youth symphony orchestras. There may be 10 in one town. For example, I'll use Atlanta. There's about 10 youth orchestras in town, and together they serve about 1,000 kids. You have to be good enough to get in. You have to take private lessons to be good enough to get in. And once you get in, there's not that many spots. So what about all the other kids that would love to be part of a youth orchestra? Well, it's tough luck for them. There's no B League or C League or D League or E League for them. So we have this enthusiasm for music from kids at a young age, but we don't have the youth orchestras to accommodate all these kids, whereas there are ad nauseum football teams, youth basketball teams, youth baseball teams all over the country. Why aren't we doing this with youth orchestras? I don't know, but we have to think about giving more kids the opportunity to be part of a youth orchestra and not preoccupy ourselves so much with we can only have 2 flutes, we can only have 2 oboes, bassoons, 2 clarinets. Why can't we have 6 or 10 and have them all play together?
That's a terrific sentiment, and it's true. But there are 2 things that I think I want to bring up. We can't just ignore the point of my question. The basis of my question was that whether you said you didn't want to talk about bands or choirs, or maybe you're saying high school orchestras. But my point is that we have had millions of kids go through exactly those things, and often in some pretty tough neighborhoods. I mean, there was a music program in almost every New York City school for 40 or 50 years. So kids who were not, and Gabe Kozakov, who ran the LaGuardia School, is a good friend of mine, and he spent his life in the New York City schools, and he was part of the supervisory contingent. Lots of kids got a chance to play music, and often at a very high level. The question I have is why, if they had that experience, and they did have that experience, have they not stayed with it? We can provide more experiences. That's great, and we should. We can provide more experiences, whether it's Atlanta Music or Il Sistema or the the woman who did the terrific job in New York with the string players that the movie was about. Forgive me, I'm blanking. I'm getting older. But my question is, why do we not have them go beyond? And I'm going to throw out an answer because I asked it as a question. I'd like to hear other people's answers. One of the reasons, it seems to me, is because a lot of the teachers themselves in the schools came from a place where band was an activity and a communal activity that they enjoyed being a part of, or orchestra, and they went to music school. Not necessarily the Cleveland Institute, but they went to Cleveland State, or they went to a state school, which are very good. The Ohio State, a fabulous school with a wonderful music school within it. And they became music educators. And what did they do? That they participated in the activity of music. And then when they got to their first teaching job and throughout their teaching career, they continued to perpetuate an idea, which is a very good one. Participate. Be active. But the question you ask is, did that person model the enjoyment of music separate from conducting it or teaching it? And did that person in that school create with the principal and the English teachers and everyone else a appreciation for listening to and the value of music beyond doing it? It's a much harder job. And it's in fact, it's a much more difficult ghost to grapple with because it's actually a lot more rewarding to teach the activity. You watch a child progress. They have a result in sound that you watch them grow. But I'm not sure that our answer to the classical music dying is only just providing more activities wherever we're providing them, although that's obviously an unalloyed good to do. By the way, this is Charles Peltz.
Yeah, I think that's an enormous question. Dante definitely brought up something that I think is very important, which is reliability. Sorry, not reliability, relatability. A lot of the time when you are, let's say, like a minority about to study music, there's a lot of relatability that you don't have when you see the orchestra stage and you see people performing music. You kind of see this disconnect with who they are. The important thing for me in sort of trying to keep this art form alive is to make sure that people of my age especially know that I am one of them, that I do enjoy this art form, that they can too, that we can have this art form coexist with other different styles of music. But I think to look at the conditioning of how possibly people get a disconnect with music, I think it does go with, there's a lot of factors. There's a lot of non-enjoyment that teachers may give off to students as they are learning. I know personally my orchestra teacher was, he expressed to me personally that when he goes home, he doesn't listen to any music. So there is a disconnect.
Done. You just did it. You just did it. That's it.
And I think there's also personally, when I relate to this, I think about when was the last time I attended the Cleveland Orchestra? I think it was 2 months ago. It's from a free ticket. And the last time I tried to purchase a ticket, it was $50. And there's something about the cost of trying to enjoy this art form sometimes that will put people off, and maybe the perceived sort of culture that you enter when you enter these concerts or enter this art form of being really quiet, just the regular things that happen in a symphony concert. So I think as long as we provide different performances that maybe encourage people to enjoy it on their level, on the way they want to enjoy music, I think we can start really breaking that down.
I think that as the school, unfortunately, becomes the place where children get their best role modeling, because the home is too often failing in that way. That the school and the teacher now has to look at themselves, and I'm not talking about the music teacher alone, I'm talking about every teacher, has got to say, what are the great things that our culture has produced? What are the great things that make humanity rise? And the English teacher has got to understand that Bach, or somebody said Schnittke, that Bach and Schnittke are important. I mean, you have adults in that building who don't listen to any different music than the children do. Now that means that that child, who may be coming from a home in which mom is just trying desperately to put food on the table, they go to the school and they see an adult who's gone to college, whom they are to respect and they want to emulate, especially if they find a connection with them as a human being. And when that person, you know, when that kid says, well, Ms. Jones, what do you listen to? Does Ms. Jones say, every morning I listen to Mozart. It makes me feel wonderful. It elevates my spirit. Or does Ms. Jones say, I love rap and hip-hop, man. And there's nothing wrong with Ms. Jones loving that. Nothing. But there's something wrong about an adult who doesn't do anything different than a child. You see, we've made it all relative. It's not relative. There's great art, and there's popular art. And there's an overlap in certain places. Does anyone want to dispute that Duke Ellington was not only a musical genius, but also an extraordinary entertainer? You've diminished him if you deprive him of either of those titles. But the fact is there's an awful lot of stuff that's only entertainment, and we should acknowledge it. And what has happened is the people who were role models in our communities, the doctors and the teachers, have jettisoned classical music as something that they, as intelligent people, sophisticated people, should be enjoying themselves. That's a sad part. They don't even enjoy it. Or they role model its consumption as a greater good for the child. You should listen to this. It will make you feel better about yourself. Play it for 10 minutes at the beginning of the English class. You see, and then the kid isn't trying to learn to play the violin, they're just listening to it.
Well, all I know is that people often ask me, because in Atlanta we work in mostly African-American communities, just by virtue of the neighborhoods that we target. And people often ask me, well, do you ever get any pushback about repertoire that, you know, having these young African-American kids playing classical music? And, you know, Chris, maybe you want to jump in here, but I've never had any of that kind of negative feedback. In fact, I've had parents that have watched their students, their kids learn to play a Tchaikovsky Symphony No. 5 part, and after their kids performed it, the Atlanta Music Project has taken these kids and families to the Atlanta Symphony to go and watch Tchaikovsky's 5th Symphony, and these parents now understand what they're seeing, and they tell me, I want to go back to the symphony without these kids because I want to be on my own so I can really focus on the music. And it's only because they've seen their kids and heard their kids perform this music, and now they have a reason to relate to the symphony. So I think that
that's a great
the positive thing, sorry not to interrupt, but just the positive thing is that it isn't like there's an unwillingness for people to give it a shot and give it a try. I think that maybe the question is there really access to an intensive learning environment where the parents are involved, where the kids are impassioned? You know, I think it's a matter of opportunity and access and intent.
Yeah, yeah. I was just to go off of what Dante says. I think they get to create their own experience with the Tchaikovsky Symphony No. 5 instead of something being told to them. I know that was important to me, and even music that I perform now, I I can tell you that I've probably played the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto maybe 30 times, and I've told people openly that if they told me that I didn't have to hear it again, I probably wouldn't think anything of it. But to go and play it with an orchestra is always such a new enriching experience, and then students can have that experience themselves and have that with their parents. Their parents then relate the Tchaikovsky Symphony to something that their child did, and I think that's probably the most pure way that we can really get the repertoire and this sort of art form back into the daily, I don't know, like lexicon or the daily knowledge of people and people who want to study music.
Yeah, I think there's and people have articulated this better than I will right now, but I think there's an immediacy to appreciation of classical music. I know that to really understand it and appreciate it, I think, like, you have to go beyond just exposure, but I think there is that immediate appreciation that can happen. We had a concert last year with the Atlanta Music Project, and we had an arrangement of Eine Kleine, and as soon as the kids played dun 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 dun, pardon me, I have a cold. You could tell, like, all the parents were totally digging it. They're like, oh, we know that, and after the concert, they're all like, oh, what was that song? That's so cool. I've heard that before. And I think that there's just a value in the community seeing their children play it, and then being able to reconnect and associate that with the orchestra is just an added plus. There are some comments and questions from the attendees that I'd like to get to. A couple of comments for me if I mispronounce your name. Let's see. Robert Rosoff has said, the lifelong attraction to sports is hero worship. How do we create classical music heroes?
This is Dante with the Atlanta Music Project. I'm going to relate basically a story from my time in Venezuela looking at El Sistema. And in Venezuela, they have their classical music heroes. Kids have their classical music heroes, and those heroes are not necessarily the best musicians in the world. They're pretty darn good, and I'm speaking about the Simón Bolívar Youth Orchestra. And I think that the reason that the Simón Bolívar Youth Orchestra musicians are heroes across Venezuela is because they grew up in the same streets and places as the kids in the youth orchestra programs. They are the youth orchestra, Simón Bolívar Youth Orchestra members, are cousins, brothers and sisters of the young kids that are going to the after-school youth orchestras. And you combine that with the accessibility, online accessibility, the fact that these young kids in the neighborhoods can go on to YouTube and see their cousins, brothers, sisters performing in all the great halls in the world. I mean, every kid in Venezuela wants to be in a youth orchestra. So what I take from that, the positive thing from that is that definitely this idea that classical musicians can be heroes, that is definitely not far-fetched. I know that in Atlanta and where the symphonies of all the cities in the United States, the musicians in these orchestras are classical music heroes, but only for the folks that know who they are. But I can tell you that if these classical musicians are more known to underserved communities, they will become classical music heroes. Time and time again, we ask our students at the Atlanta Music Project, who do you want to be like? Who is your hero? Who is your mentor? And these are not the teachers asking. These are external evaluators. Who is it that you look up to? And 8 or 9 times out of 10, you know what their answer is. It's going to be Chris Thibdeau. It's going to be the teacher that teaches them every day. These teachers are heroes for our kids already. We just need more.
That's well said, Dante. Any comments from Mr. Peltz or Carlos on this?
I guess I really don't think, I think that kids young people do have heroes, and they are, Dante's absolutely right. They're the people who directly affect them, and they see them that way. And making large cultural heroes beyond being a child is probably a different set of things, and that unfortunately gets into the way that all heroes are determined in our culture. And I'm not going to say that most of the heroes, or most of the people that we call heroes in our culture necessarily should be. I mean, I think that there are an awful lot of NBA players who kids would say are their heroes, and I don't think that's necessarily the best hero they could have. That would be my view of heroism is too narrow.
I think Mr. Peltz, hit on a great point, though. What he did say at the beginning of his comment was that the people that are around our kids on a daily basis that are close to them are definitely the more immediate heroes. And I think that we can all take lessons from that as classical musicians. There are 80, 90 classical musicians in a big symphony orchestra. If these musicians were seen in communities on a daily basis, either performing or teaching in underserved communities around young people, how many kids would look up to them? A lot of our parents at the Land Music Project, whenever we want to have our parents take their kids to a symphony concert or to this event or that event, the first thing that parents tell us is, can you please tell our kids, can you please sell this concert to our kids? Because the hardest thing for the parents is to convince their kids to go. But once their kids are convinced of going anywhere, of doing anything, the parents just say, really? You want to do that? All right, well, let's do it. So if we can get these classical musicians, these heroes, to interface with young kids on a more regular basis, on a more intensive basis, where the kids have instruments in their hands, the kids will determine what the families and parents end up doing. I think it's a slow process, and we have to start small. We have to do it now, and eventually we scale it. The phenomenon in El Sistema in Venezuela, where half a million kids are playing classical music every day after school, and the entire youth wants to be a classical musician. It took 35, 40 years of concrete, strategic growth. It took them a long time before they got to scale this obsession with classical music. So we've had an amazing history of music education in the public schools in the United States. Unfortunately, the reality is it's dropped off, especially in neighborhoods where, in less affluent neighborhoods. But it's not too late to start rebuilding. We just have to start small and not get too discouraged. Because every day, I just see with our program, parents love it, kids love it. They're really, we just bring them the real deal, the real meaty stuff, and eventually it'll spread.
Awesome. A couple of comments from Simon Jacobs. He wrote, disappear and then reappear later on in life, regarding our conversation earlier about the disconnect between education and the love for music. And he'd like to point out that there's a couple of programs that are interesting called Adopt a Musician, run by different orchestras, for example, Toronto and Montreal Symphonies. And also there's the Quebec Opera opens up dress rehearsals to high school students for free, and that's a great experience. Steve, if we have time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Question from Brian Walden. This is a little lengthy. Regarding the overlap between the art form and entertainment that Mr. Peltz mentioned, is it possible that we in serious art music could or should examine artists like Frank Zappa who have made the jump between both? Also, should we look at artists like Tony Bennett, who in the 90s to the 2000s has become very popular to young people without sacrificing the actual music? What is it that these two artists have done that makes them accessible without sacrificing their art form?
I think it's exactly what you just said. They didn't sacrifice their art form. I think that oftentimes when people try to be relatable, the worst thing that they could do is to try and dumb down their art form, try to, I don't know, make enormous cuts that they might not think is very interesting to the audience. But I think Tony Bennett was a real straight-up jazz musician, and Yo-Yo Ma is a really straight-up cellist and classical musician. They never really sacrificed their artistic excellence. They basically brought it to the people, and I think that's the only way that you could really have like a long, very effective artistic life when in regards to a life like Tony Bennett. I think that's what we all try to do, and especially, I mean, everyone on this panel. I don't think anyone has said that they rewrote, you know, G Unit song for orchestra so that they could get people who listen to G Unit to the Atlanta Symphony. I think we're all basically saying, why don't we try and take the really good stuff, the Tchaikovsky Symphony, the Beethoven 5, the Bartok String Quartet, and let's see if it has legs on its own in a community. And crazy thing is that it always does. It really communicates really well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I have a friend who's the creative director for the Georgia Symphony Orchestra, and he blogs sometimes, and he wrote a very interesting piece. It's very lengthy, but the premise of it is that while many people say classical music is irrelevant in today's age, and how do we make it relevant, his answer is that we should not make classical music relevant to today's age, that we live in a time where everything is fast-paced and everything is incredibly short-lived, you know, 2-minute YouTube videos or a 5-minute drive here. Everything is just about now, now, now. And his argument is that classical music isn't about that. It's about something else. It's about answering the greater questions of the universe through music. So I really like that response, and I think Carlos, what you said definitely resonates with me, is that exactly, by not sacrificing your art form, I think that does make you accessible and eventually successful. Another question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, a large question here is the difference between, is classical music dying, or is the making of a living surrounding classical music having the trouble? If we go back to Bach, he created much of his work with the Collegium at Zimmermann's coffee house, which were amateurs. And he wrote that music for them. And therefore, he created great art for people who were amateurs, because the economy of Leipzig didn't warrant what became the Gewandhaus, didn't exist in 1740 because it just didn't have that ability yet. And so the bigger question might be, you know, is it that we're going to simply, as someone just said, you know, look at classical music for what it is and appreciate it for what it is, and understand that if we do, there might not be the ability for as many people to make a living at it. That's a very cold-hearted statement on its face, but it does address the issue of divorcing the ability to create an economy with it versus the art itself, which simply exists regardless of an economy around it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And one of our attendees actually brought in a comment. The music isn't dying, however, how it is presented may be changing. Live symphonic music is now dependent on an unsustainable business model. And I think, yeah, I mean, we can see that.
Yeah, it's obvious.
Yeah. And something one of my professors told me in undergrad is that you know, you may be one of the best musicians, but there's a good chance that you're just gonna die in an unmarked grave. So,
oh, it's so true. It's so true.
I didn't catch it. What was it? You may be talented musicians, but what?
Oh, you may be like one of the best musicians in the world, but there's a large chance that you're just gonna die in an unmarked grave.
Oh, well, my goodness. Well, I guess he was probably trying to cull the herd emotionally. That's a pretty draconian response.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
But
think
I
as
do-
far
but I do think-
sorry.
I just want to say that I do think, you know, I was thinking about this conversation, of course. And first of all, I want to say thank you again to everyone for inviting me to be part of this. I'm really fascinated by my younger colleagues and what they're expressing and how they're doing things. But I was thinking about something. And if I'm a welder, and I'm a terrific welder in Manhattan, and I make $75 an hour welding on skyscrapers, and for some reason, family reason, I decide to move to Tupelo, and I want to be a welder, I'm probably not going to make $75 an hour. I'm the same welder. I'm still the best welder in Manhattan. But now I'm in Tupelo, and they don't pay that. And if I'm the best, if I'm one of the best Juilliard violists, and I go and play in the New York Philharmonic, I make a lot of money coming right out of school. But that violist roommate, who's another violist, who's probably within inches of the same ability, goes to Phoenix or Tucson. They're not going to make as much as they did in the Philharmonic. But there's pressure on the Phoenix and Tucson orchestras to keep up. And it's something to be thought of. I'm not advocating a position, but we have in music, maybe it's because for so many years, up until the 60s, musicians really did work an awful lot, and they were very unsteady work. Talk to any of your colleagues who were in the Philly Orchestra, you know, in 1950 or 1950. You know, you had a 30-some week season. You know, you had a lot of unemployment. You had to do jobs in the summer that were non-music for many of them. But there was that seismic change in the 60s in which you went to 52 weeks of pay, and it made it a very different thing. So I think that these are issues that everybody has to deal with, and it's crushing to come to Juilliard or the Cleveland Institute to be so talented and so well trained, and realize that you're not going to make as much as the engineer who was as talented in engineering and as well trained in engineering automatically.
Yeah, I think there was two topics that I really liked that kind of stem from that. It's like relativity as far as orchestras and their locations go. There's always a challenge during contract talks of, well, we can't have the best artists come because artistic excellence relies on the money that we can pay musicians. When you think of what the Philly Orchestra makes in Philadelphia and what the New York Philharmonic makes in New York, or what LA makes in LA, it's totally different from the Cleveland Orchestra when they make the salary, which is basically the same as theirs, and then you have a median salary of Cleveland, which is, I think it finally hit $20,000 a year, and I think the median salaries in those bigger cities are upwards to 60 to 70 grand a year. So I think that really has to change that relativity, which is the biggest dollar amount gets the best musician, which it's not true. It's really the dollar amount in each city, it changes. And then on top of that, I think, well, when I was in, when I graduated CIM for the first time in 2009, I had a heart-to-heart with my teacher, and he said, Carlos, there were 3 job openings in 2009, 3 cello positions. And I think that, at that point I was thinking, oh, I'll join an orchestra, I'll have a BMW by the time I'm 20, and it'll be fantastic. But we were forced to, especially the people who graduated with me, to think differently about our music careers. So it's true, it's not classical music dying, it's the way we're going to make our professions as classical musicians. And that's changing already, and we're having discussions like this online, and all of my friends have joined organizations, also STEM organizations, or things like the Providence String Quartet in Rhode Island, because they understand that basically it's our generation that's going to reinvent what we know as the classical music culture today. So we're all pretty psyched, which is a good thing, but it's a lot of work ahead of us.
I have a question from Ashley Daniel for Charles Peltz. What do you consider to be the greatest argument for keeping music in the schools?
The greatest argument for keeping music in the school is that art music creates two things. It creates an environment where a person has to let the experience unfold in its time, and the person has to wait for it. You see, even if I go to an art museum, I can look at that painting at the pace I wish. if I read a poem, I can read it one stanza at a time and leave it be for a week. But a piece of music demands that I listen to it at its pace. And that's a great lesson for human beings. The other thing that is great about art music is that it is abstract language. And that it says to us, can we simply listen to something that we might not feel like we know? And can we enjoy something we don't know or feel intimately knowledgeable about? Again, if I look at a painting, I say, oh, that's red. Oh, that's blue. Oh, that's a straight line. Oh, that's a curved line. Oh, that's a clear image. Oh, that's a blurred image. But in music, most young people have very few terms to use for that. They can be introduced to the idea of listening to something, consuming something that they don't have knowledge of, but can enjoy and let affect them. But you've got to give that time. You see, the adults in the room have to give the young person time to do that. See, I agree when my colleagues talk about people being parents hearing Yannick Klein, immediately recognize it and knowing it. I think that's a great anecdote, obviously true and inspiring. But you see, I think that if you were to take children young enough and start them as a group of 20 children and play music for them, I think you could actually get them to respond to it as a consumed and not participatory art, which means when they're 12 and they do have a case of the heebie-jeebies all the time, they've still had that experience. So I think those facts about the art are wonderful things for human beings to participate in. They have a larger metaphorical purpose than simply the art itself. It has nothing to do with whether you're going to learn math better. If that happens too, that's great.
Sure, and I I agree with that statement. It's really cool that music and art has been proven to help with math and reading, but it would be nice if it could stand on its own. I think, however, one of the most exciting pieces of research about child development that I've been reading, it comes from a book from the author Paul Tuff called How Children Succeed. In his book, he talks about the latest research in child development, and it's looking like more and more one of the greatest indicators of future success for kids is what kind of character they develop. They've come up with certain character traits that you can evaluate at a young age, and if the kids score well on these character traits, it actually is able to indicate future success more closely than actual test scores or grades. And these character traits involve the things that can be involved. These character traits are easily developed when kids are involved in classical music training and other arts that demand a lot of work over a sustained amount of work over a long period of time, and that helps these kids develop an understanding of delayed gratification. It helps kids to be curious about the world, about things beyond their environment. Also really important is how kids recover from failure. If you do poorly on a performance, okay, that's one thing, but you're always going to have another chance. How kids bounce back from these failures is so determinant of their future success. Are these kids optimistic in general? Are these kids able to adapt and function in environments that are different than their own? So we're talking about social intelligence. All of these character traits that studies are now showing to be indicative of future success can be developed in music, in band, in orchestra, in choir. So I think that on its own is an extremely good argument for keeping music in the schools. Obviously, all the extra tutoring and prep testing for English and math isn't working, quite frankly, in a lot of neighborhoods. In a lot of neighborhoods where we're trying to up those scores, it's not working. And if we look in those same neighborhoods, those are the ones that don't have music. So I think that case speaks for itself.
We also have a couple of...
Just to put a, I think that last statement you made, I think there's not necessarily a cause and effect that's very direct, and we as musicians should be careful about when we make some of those cause and effect arguments. We should make our arguments that are pretty direct. We know that things do relate to each other, and there are some causal relationships. But that's assuming that all the math teachers in those school districts are good math teachers. If they're lousy math teachers, even if the kid has a good music program, the kids are going to do lousy in math.
Oh, but my argument was that that music is associated, the study of music.
I understand that. No, I understand your argument, and you articulated that argument very well. That's not my point. My point is only you were saying when you look at where the kids aren't doing well in math, those are the places that don't have music. Well, there are a number of variables that could also attribute to those kids not doing well in math.
Yeah.
So there's not a direct cause and effect there, and we as musicians should be careful about when we make we create cause and effect arguments, because if we're wrong on them, we weaken our case.
Sure, but I didn't say all of them. I said often. I said often is the case. That's a key word. And also we have to remember that I was advocating for associations. I never stated that there's a direct cause and effect. And I take your point, and I'm aware of it, but I was talking only about association. And if the association is constant and happens over a number of years and is shown to be the case in studies, then I think that is something definitely, it lends food for thought.
Definitely intriguing. A couple of comments, again, from Simon Jacobs to kind of tie along in this discussion. Children that are exposed and learn music before the age of 8 process it through the language part of the brain as opposed to the oral part, which is the case with people that start later. It is also so important to listen to music, not just hear it. It is difficult to listen to a new piece as opposed to one that is already known. We should begin to wrap up here. There's another comment from David Perlman. There's a common belief that in order to attract young people, orchestras need to play contemporary music. I think that this is nonsense. After all, Beethoven is new to people who have never heard his music. Any comments?
I agree.
Yeah. Someone quoted the fellow in Atlanta. I read someone in Texas wrote an article for, I think, the San Antonio paper that made a very courageous argument. Look, let's play this music for lots of people, and the ones who like it will like it, and the ones who don't won't. That's it. It's what it is. And it's beautiful, and it's great. And if not everybody thinks it's beautiful and great, well, then that's the way it is. But we shouldn't try to manipulate it so that everyone likes something in it when you've changed it.
Yeah.
Remember that musical a few years ago, I love you, you're perfect, now change? Maybe that predates everybody on this. Regardless, there was a musical of that title, and all of us of a certain age or who have been in certain relationships related to it immediately. The person tells us they love you, you're perfect, now I'm going to change you to make you better.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think that the key is what are we doing to bring this great music to as many people as possible. The music speaks for itself. I don't think the music has ever been an issue. I think we all agree right there. So definitely access, and definitely, you know, let's change the direction of how this music gets to people that haven't heard it. Let's bring the music to them, to different neighborhoods, to different venues, as opposed to, you know, trying to tweak, or maybe not as opposed to, but at the same time as tweaking marketing policies and, you know, young night at the symphony, you know, things like that. Those are always great, but let's make sure to broaden our audience by bringing this great music to them in a real form.
I know there are some people who are interested in the day-to-day operations of the organizations that you're all involved in. One of those questions comes from Simon Jacobs. Does the Muscle House pay the teachers, or are they all volunteers?
It goes both ways. Some of them, well, right now we're doing the fundraising, so we basically, the fundraising shows how many students that we can take in a 15-week session. The musicians, or sorry, the instructors will get paid. Some of them will volunteer some of their time during the larger volunteer efforts, but I really think it's important to pay musicians. I believe in the value of what they do. I believe in the value of our performances as well. But there are organizations that have a very difficult time paying their musicians, and I understand that as well. But to me, I want the money to be there because that's the basis of our organization is instructor happiness, which spreads to student happiness. So they'll all be paid. Whoever gives the lesson through us will get paid.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. It looks like we have answered all the questions that have been submitted by the attendees. Steve, is there anything that I've dropped?
No, I think that's it. Simon Jacobs just wrote back saying he could go on for hours. Well, I mean, you know, our whole panel could, it sounds like, and I think, you know, it's wonderful to have so many, you know, so many passionate voices and so many great questions. You know, this is always a pleasure to have this kind of conversation going. So, yeah, we should probably wrap it up. I obviously want to thank everyone for attending, taking your time to spend a little time with us tonight, and certainly thank our panelists, Charles, Carlos, and Dante, and Chris Thibdeau for being a great moderator. Thank you guys for sharing your visions and your programs with us tonight. You're all doing wonderful things, and we certainly wish you the best and want to keep up with what you're doing in the future. And again, to everyone out there, you can find out more about all of them through polyphonic.org. I think we have links to their websites. And look for information about upcoming webinars in the spring soon. And certainly there's a wealth of resources on polyphonic.org about the kinds of topics that have been discussed tonight. So we welcome you to go on and check that out. Again, thanks to everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.